then keep your camera off, but otherwise you can turn it on, as you see here in the welcome slide. Hi, so nice to see some of you and see that all these people are present. Yes, hi, great. And I think this is also part of the topic of today's Meet and Eat lecture, right? We need some human interaction, not only when teaching, but also when talking about education. So this is something we're going to do today. At least Timon is going to take us along. So I'd like to welcome you all, but especially Timon Idema, who is an associate professor at the Faculty of Applied Sciences at our university. And he's also an education fellow for the Teaching Academy. And he's doing many things. So one of them is also the program director of the master program for nanobiology, which is a joint program of TU Delft and Erasmus MC. And in this program, he's also teaching quite a lot. For teaching, he also received prize, the Westerdijk Prize in 2020. And Timo is willing to share with us his thoughts on future of education, since we have learned many things, of course, during this pandemic, and still are learning, I guess, many things. So I'm very curious to hear what Timon is going to take us through. And I think the talk is going to be like, his presentation will be like 20 minutes, and then there will be 20 minutes left to have a discussion. But please feel free to interrupt during the presentation or put your questions in the chat, which will be moderated by Ossie and Ted. All right, so Timon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anushka. Welcome to my talk. And as Anushka said, right, it's half talk, half discussion. So it's really meant to be a discussion part, not me just telling you what's what. But let me say then start with an introduction in where we go from here, or my ideas on where we go from here. So to start off, right, I'm going to take you back a little bit in time to a moment about 12 years ago when I had a very nice day. It was the day that I received this little blue carton cylinder, and it also had something inside. And by the way that I'm dressed in this picture, you can tell what day it was, and also by the fact that I had fewer gray hairs, you can tell it's been some time. So this is the day I got my PhD. And what of course happens with a PhD, you invite all your family, you have a party afterwards, and then traditionally, of course, you get a gift. So the other man in gray hair is my father. I will look like that in about 10 years from now. And they gave me a very nice gift at that time, which at that time I did not realize how prophetic that gift was and how useful it would be for my future career. Because the gift, and maybe you can guess from the bag that my dad is holding, was this camera. And I have been using this for about 1% of the time for fun, which was the intended use, and 99% of the time last year for recording my lectures. Right, so it was hidden already back then when I got my PhD that this would be a thing to do. Now, this does not come naturally to me. Right? I got my PhD in theoretical physics. And theoretical physicists are trained very well in one particular skill. If you have ever encountered a theoretical physicist, you may have wondered how they got to be the way they are. Well, here's the secret, right? We train theoretical physicists in the use of one tool exactly, and that tool is the blackboard. Right? Theoretical physicists love writing equations on the blackboard. If you're a professor, you're writing the equations. If you're a student, you're studying the equations. And then when you master this, you are also allowed to also write equations on the blackboard yourself. Right? That's a rite of passage that allows you to become a theoretical physicist. And so we've been doing this for 4 centuries, right? Newton did this, Einstein did this. All the famous physicists that you may have heard about used blackboards to communicate. And we were happily continuing their line all the way up to the year 2020. And then 2020 came, you all know what happened. And this could be either a student or a teacher I don't know, right? Because both of us were biting our nails or our pencils, trying to figure out how to move from the blackboard to online, because the blackboard cannot be put online. Now, with this idea of moving blackboards online, right, however, stuck with the old idea that theoretical physicists have of teaching, right? The lecturer comes into the lecture room, tells their story, derives a beautiful equation, and then in the mind of the theoretical physicist professor, the students then go home and do this. This, right? The students go home and do this. They gather around a table, they collect their blocks and their problems, and they all work together on solving the problems. Now that would be great. Unfortunately, in practice, maybe they do this, right? They try to absorb the knowledge through osmosis from the book. Now, I mean, this is outside the realm of theoretical physics, of course, but I've since moved into biophysics, and I can tell you this does not work, right? You need to be actually awake to absorb the knowledge from a book. The students, of course, figured this out way before us. And so if I would teach writing beautiful equations on the blackboard like I was trained to do, what would the students do? Well, they would actually come, they would pay attention, they would try to solve the problems. Then they found they couldn't solve the problems. And then what they did was this. They took out their laptops or their cell phones and they looked up a YouTube video where somebody explained the theory to them again. Has anything changed in that respect in 2020? Not so much, right? The students still do this. The only difference being that now they keep 1.5 meters apart from each other. So how do we deal with this? Well, we can say, well, maybe great, right? The students are resilient. They find their own solutions and so on, right? So we, as the teachers, we just keep on teaching, and at the end of the semester, we give them an exam. And then we can have them write the exam, and then if they did not pay close attention or did not do it every way that we wanted them to do it, they will just fail the exam. Now, that is a very teacher-centered way of thinking, and it's not working with the students, right? It's talking to the students, and it's something that I find I do not like to do. Right? Much as I love the blackboard, and I'm not going to give up on the use of the blackboard, I do not advocate this way of teaching. Now, probably none of you do either, because you wouldn't be here, but it's still something that if you ask somebody what is their picture of teaching, this is still very much the picture that people have. Now, of course, people have done research into this, and many of you may have seen the curve on the next slide, which already is from several years ago, where people did a meta analysis of learning methods and compared lectures versus active learning. Now, this paper got a lot of pushback because they didn't really define active very well, and they had different kinds of active and different kinds of lecture and so on, right? But the point, I think, stands, right? Activating the students also during your classes is going to help them in mastering the material. And in fact, going back to the idea of the theoretical physicist, right, where at some point the professor hands over the piece of chalk to the students, that works, but it doesn't work with 100 students in the class. So it works well in one-on-one training, but it doesn't work so well with multiple students. Okay, so people have thought about this, and then one solution that people came up with is say, well, what we should do is we should flip our classroom. Right? We should no longer lecture in the classroom, we should just record everything and then use the classroom to answer questions or do problems, or it's not always exactly clear what they mean, because sometimes they do it like this, right, where they just mirror the classroom. Sometimes they literally turn it upside down and leave the students hanging. It is quite a challenge to do this. So I would advocate that rather than flipping the classroom, where you shift still the problem to the students, we should do something else. And what we should do, or what we can try to do, is integrate with the students and have the discussion with the students, bring that to the classroom, essentially go back to the way that Einstein taught, right, with the chalk, standing with the student in front of the blackboard. Now, how do we do this with 100 students or with 40 participants as we have in this session? Now, there is where modern technology can actually help us. So I'm going to do this not by telling you how I think we should do it, but by showing you and making you actively participate. So suppose we are now in a lecture It's going to be a physics lecture because I'm a physicist, but of course I need to have some topic that you can all connect to. You have all studied the prior material, and this lecture is going to be about material properties. And it's quite a simple starting point, right? We're going to talk about two types of materials. We have solid materials like this glass here, and we have liquid materials like the water in the glass, right? But this is something you have all seen before, you know from experience, right? You've all drunk water from a glass. Right? You know there's a difference between liquid and solid. All right, so far for the theory, right? I'm going to ask you a question about this. And this question is going to show up in the poll. Right? We are going to discuss another type of material, and I'm simply going to ask you to classify it. And this material is shaving cream. Right? Some of you may have encountered it this morning, others maybe not. Shaving cream, so think about it, right? Is this a solid or a liquid? Right? The poll is going to show up here. Please tell me which of these it is. There we are. Please fill in your answer in the poll. So I actually do this in class. Right? Before we had the pandemic, I did this kind of questions, and I also allowed students to talk to each other about the answers. But their response would be pretty much like yours, right? They would all enthusiastically whip out their phones and start answering the question. I see we have 38 responses, so pretty good turnout. And I can also see the answers, and this is also something I would do in class. I would see the answers, right? The statistics of the answers on my iPad. And then, of course, the next thing I would do is ask if somebody would maybe be interested in explaining their answer. So let's do that, right? So we see we have a majority for both solid and fluid. Somebody does not want the answer. Well, there's always a right answer among the options. Is there someone who would care to explain their answer? Not the theoretical physicist in the room. Right?
Oh, maybe I can. I don't know.
Please go ahead.
Well, I'm not sure, but I think it has both properties of a solid and a liquid. So, and you want it to kind of be solid if it's on your face, but you want it to be liquid when you remove the cream. So I thought, so it's either C or D, but I think it has properties of both phases. So that's why I went for C.
Oh, well, thank you. You're pretty close. And rather, again, than telling you, I'm going to show you. So I'm going to stop sharing for a minute so that you can see me somewhat bigger. And I think you can now pin me so that you see me larger. So I brought some shaving cream, right? And what I'm going to do with it is quite simple. And this is now going to be a bit of a challenging. So we have some shaving cream here. How am I going to test whether it's solid or liquid? Well, how would I test if the water is liquid or solid? Yeah, I could flip it, right? I'm not gonna flip the glass of water because it will go over my keyboard. But actually, I can tilt this quite a lot before it will move, right? So it is pretty close to being a solid here. And actually, even if I shake this, right, it goes back to its original shape. I can even tap it a little bit. We'll get some on my finger, but it will oscillate, but then go back to its shape. But if you want to get it on your face, right, it should flow, right? And actually, when it came out of the canister, it also did flow. So if you put a large enough force on it, it becomes a liquid, or it behaves like a liquid. And so your answer, Mariette, thank you very much. It was pretty close to the actual thing. So this is pretty neat, right? So this is a material that's in between a solid and a liquid. And this is a demonstration that I also do at the start of one of my lectures, where I actually put it on the table of the students, and the students love this. But what's even nicer about this, and this is for this I need to go back to my slides. There we go. So what's even nicer is that what is this material actually made of? How did we get the shaving cream? Does anybody know? Well, it was in here, right? But it actually had a lot less volume when it was in the canister than when it came out. And maybe you noticed, but before I put it out, I shook this thing, right? And everybody who ever uses shaving cream knows that you have to do that because otherwise it actually is a liquid. And by shaking it, you put air bubbles in it. And air is a gas. And together the air, the gaseous air and the liquid substance that's in here make a solid. Right? They make something that we call a foam. It's a lot like the foam in dishwasher stuff, or soap bubbles that you blow. So we call this a foam. It's a combination of liquids and gases, and they behave under low forces like a solid. Now, I really like this example because it's a nice example for a physics thing which is maybe somewhat counterintuitive, but it's also actually a very nice metaphor of what I want to achieve with teaching. Right? You need to have these connections between, say, the gas and the liquid, and you can interpret who is the liquid and who is the gas. I'm not going to do that, right? The teachers and the students. Or it could be whipped cream, indeed. Right? This whipped cream does the same thing, right? And when it's in the package, before you whip it, it's liquid. When you whip it, you add in the air bubbles, and it also behaves like a solid. Right? So it's the same thing. And this stands for what I would say is the way to go, which is blended learning. So what is blended learning? Blended learning is where you really integrate these two things, right? So here we have a student who is following a lecture, maybe on her laptop. But what is she actually doing? Well, she's doing not just watching the lecture, she is also solving problems in between the lecture. And so what I've tried to do in my lectures now, especially that we've moved online, is to have this interchange between questions like we just did, demonstrations, where we unfortunately had to do with videos, and pieces of theory. And why does this work? Well, I bet that if somebody asks you next week what this lecture was about, the thing you are going to remember is the shaving cream. So this is the thing that's going to be stuck in your head, and hopefully that will be a hook to remember the blended approach and things like that. All right, so how do we do this in practice? Well, of course, in practice, it does mean that you have to make videos for your lectures in this online setting. And there I found, this is something that I found is something that I've struggled with a lot. Right? I already asked some people to keep on their cameras so that I can look at people, especially when I did a traditional lecture where I did not do the blackboard, but I had slides. Right? So I have slides in my lecture. We have technology, of course, to paste me in the slides, and you get something that looks like this. Right, so here's an introductory lecture from a quantum mechanics course that I'm teaching as we speak. And here I pasted myself, I filmed myself in front of a green piece of cloth and then cut it out and pasted it in these things. I hate this. Some people love this, fine. I hate this because it lacks the interaction and it is static. It includes the slides that I already made. I have to remember what was on my slides. It does not really work for me. I do it because I have to, but it doesn't work. What works a lot better, ironically, is if I go back to my Blackboard. Though I don't have a Blackboard, but I have an iPad. I can write on it, and I write equations. And then again, I film myself actually with this camera that I got for my PhD. And I record the screen of my iPad, and I paste it next to each other. And then after the lecture, we have a Q&A session where I just keep on the iPad and I keep on writing it, and we have the students asking questions about it. In both forms, of course, you can have these questions in between, right? The modern technology again helps you there, where you can just in bright space have a piece of video, then have a multiple choice question. Students have to answer it before they get the next video and things like that, and can even make it count as part of the grade. So there are multiple ways in which you can do this, and the nice thing here, I think, is that because we are now forced to go on the on the creative path, you can choose something that fits with you. And the students also can choose something that fits with them. Right? If they like my style of explaining quantum mechanics, they can watch my lectures. If they like the style of somebody in a different program or a different university, they can go and see their lectures. And there are many ways that lead to Rome. Right? In the end, it does not really matter if they watch my lecture or somebody else's. It matters what they learn. They need me for the interaction, right? For the questions. Right? They need me to tell them, okay, this and this and this are the topics that I want you to learn during this course. But if somebody else's style fits better with them, why should they not be watching them? And this also gives us an opportunity to recognize that maybe not all students need the same path and need the same destination. It also allows us to diversify in the style of students and the objectives of students. Of course, there's a baseline that we want to set, but especially when it comes to elective modules and elective things that students can do, we can allow them to diversify much more easily than by organizing new courses ourselves. And if we do that, and this is my experience, right? If we give students assignments telling them to go and find a lecture that fits with this, go and present something, go and read a paper, then the students actually go and do this. Right? This ideal that I started out with, it actually works if you allow the students to choose their own path. So as an example, I just finished teaching the course that started out with this shaving foam in lecture 1. And at the end, this is a master's course, at the end the students all present papers, right? They have to select a recent paper from the field of soft matter and they have to present it to each other. And there are two things that strike me there, right? So they have 2 weeks to prepare this. They can ask me questions about the content and they come up with really good questions and they give really good presentations. That's one part. The other part is I tell the students also to grade each other, right? I grade them independently. They grade each other. I don't look at their grades before I give my grade, but then I calculate the average grade of which they gave each other. And it is typically the same grade rounded to half points that I would have given them. So they are also fair. So at some point they have outgrown me. They don't really need me anymore, right? Just to ask these questions too. Taking it one step further, some of you may have heard of dream teams, of solar cars and hyperloops. I've been very lucky to work with groups of students in the former dream team and Delft team known as iGEM. Right? So this is a more bio-oriented project. I'm happy to tell you more about it if you're interested. This is a group of students, about 10 to 12, that come together for half a year to work on a project of their own choosing and then compete in an international competition, usually in Boston, this year online. And our teams have won the global competition twice. Right? And every year they bring home at least some prizes. So I'm very happy to see the results there. But so here too, right, it works. Now, is everything great? No, there is a pitfall. Right? I told you I'm fine with students looking at lectures from someone else. But there are a gazillion universities out there and a gazillion lecturers at every university if we keep on doing this. And so the pitfall is this, right? The pitfall is actually the beauty of the collection of science. So where we can add value is not so much by telling students this is that, by guiding them through this library, right? And helping them along the path, finding their route to what they want to do. All right, so I think my 20 minutes are up. Let me summarize what I think we should be focusing on for the next period while we think about rethinking education. I think we should help students find their way through the library. And one of the ways is by adding to the library. Right? So here's a book that I've added to the library, very happy with. It's an open textbook. I think this is a way to go, and the library of open textbooks is growing. Right? You should go not just on my textbook, we should make collaborative textbook. Right? If you teach quantum mechanics as well, we should work together on making a better textbook. Right? We should not stick with books, right? We should have practicals, right? As a colleague of mine, Arjen Jacobi, he's doing very beautiful Python practicals because the students can't go into the lab. It's where you can get instant feedback and instant response on what you do. All of this works best, of course, in small group learning. And the online technologies allow us to organize these small groups, even if you have many students. Right? Rather than putting 300 students in a big lecture room, you can put 20 students in the discussion group and have them discuss with the TA or with the teacher. It's very important is that we need to think about how we blend specifically, first and foremost, for our students, right, for our audience. We need to rethink then on what that means when we do a test, right, rather than having these big exams. How do we test this? And we need to do it in a way that it's close to what we love, right? Because if you don't love what you're doing, then the students are not going to love it either. So in summary, right, we have a great opportunity here. We should make use of it. Of course, we are struggling to keep our heads above the water, but now that we are kind of starting to float, we should focus on these things and take them forward rather than going back as quickly as possible to the big lecture hall with 1,000 students and a professor writing on the blackboard. Thank you very much, and I hope we have a nice discussion.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, we can clap because also unmute. Thanks a lot. Yeah, great. Okay, well, I presume there are some questions. So how do we proceed, Orsi? Would you like to, are there questions in the chat or shall we ask the audience to
I think the audience can unmute themselves, put on the camera as well if they wish.
Yep. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah, Rita or Tom, do you have a question? You're on mute. Yes.
Yeah, who goes first?
Yeah, you go first.
Okay.
Tom.
Well, I just wanted to make a small remark. A lot of this is already happening, of course. Yeah, so using open textbooks, making lectures interactive, using all kinds of tools. So, well, first of all, I think a lot of the things you are suggesting are really useful, but a lot of these things are already happening. And I might add that I think that a lot of the suggestions that you made are even useful in a large lecture room with maybe 300 students. If you use, for example, these multiple choice questions, or there are tons of things that you can do, it's really possible to make a lecture for a group of 300 students interactive. So I think it's even useful in a large group setting.
So I appreciate your comment. So I fully agree, right? I'm not the one who has invented a super new technique here, right? This is there's a lot of people that are pushing this together, right? And I really think we should do this together. So that for starters. I also agree, right? In a large lecture room, there are definitely ways that you can improve things and make things interactive, and we also try to do that. Like this multiple choice we also do in big lecture rooms. I would say that we should not do the one and leave the other, right? So the point that I started with, but from the big lecture room, my experience is that often students come then back and tell me, but okay, your lecture was great and we were interactive and everything, but still I went afterwards on YouTube to look something up because it was too fast for me, or I got stuck in the problem and then I couldn't go back to the lecture, right? And there I think we can help the students, right? By not just unleashing them on YouTube, but helping them find their path. And of course, this is a challenge. With the larger the group, the bigger the challenge. But now we have all these resources that we built during this pandemic. Let's make them useful for our students. But yes, I totally agree. Right? I'm not the only person doing this, and I'm very happy that many people are doing this. So if I suggested otherwise, then I apologize.
No.
It's just
Not a problem.
enthusiasm.
No, I just made this remark because so I'm mainly involved in, how do you call it, service teaching. And well, just from a practical point of view, a lot of these first year groups are multiples of hundreds of students. So these are really large groups. I think the number of students will only increase in coming years. So there's also a practical element, of course, to how is it possible to really get them to work in small groups? But no, You're totally right.
So I think we should still think about that.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
still allow for diversification also within this large group.
Mhm.
And say
Yes, sir.
it's okay maybe if they don't all take the same problems, or right? But that also means that we have to rethink exams
Yes,
on what
that
how we test.
that was my question, because if you have large groups of students, then you said rethinking testing. So do you have any thoughts about that already?
Yeah, so I would say that the way that we, okay, very exaggerating, right? The traditional way we do it is the picture that I showed, right? The classroom with no matter how many students, you just print more copies and they all do exactly the same problems. So I would say that in an ideal world, we flip that upside down and we go and say to the students, okay, which problems, which level do you think you are, and show me that you are that level. And then some students will want to get the 10, right? And so, okay, we really master this. Some students will say, oh, well, I'm happy to say that I can use this, right? And I can apply what I've learned, but no more, right? And of course, we set a minimal level, right? But we allow students to diversify in this thing. Of course, this requires a change of thinking, right? So we have to think differently about what a test means. Of course, we have a minimal level, but right now, right, if you have half of your answers correct, you get a 6. And the diploma is exactly the same thing as if you get all your answers correct.
Yeah.
And so I think there is room for diversification, especially as our student body grows.
Yeah, that's interesting. I see a hand, Mr. Lehnen.
Yes, indeed. One of your messages was to blend for your audience. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit on exactly what you feel about that? What you mean with that?
So this is a tip I kind of stole from Diederik Jekyll. You may have heard of him. He was a science journalist for a while on TV. Now is a science journalist for say preaching investigating COVID. And so he gave a talk at a physics conference a couple of years back. And what he drove home, the point is that, well, you cannot change your audience, right? You may want to, but your audience is a given. But if you give a talk to a group of theoretical physicists, or you give a group of teachers, or a group of first-year students, you can't give the same talk. Right? But what you can change is what you talk about and how you talk. So for first-year students in a big lecture room, it needs to be different than for master's students who have taken an elective, than for your fellow teachers. And so you have to think about that and not just give the same story. Of course, you can use similar elements, right? I mean, I can do this also with the first years, right? But still, I have to think about how to present this, how to bring this. And this is an important element of connecting to.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions or thoughts you would like to share?
There was a question earlier by somebody who was
Gita,
waiting.
Gita had a question. Okay. And then Margreet. Gita, you're still muted.
Sorry for that. I was wondering, because you said something about there are more than one road to Rome, and you said also that it's important that there is a baseline. So I was wondering, is that baseline really changing throughout all these remote teaching or new thoughts on blended learning or anything? Is your baseline changing?
So far not, right? But honestly, also, right, last year when we were all hit upon by COVID, then all I was thinking about, and probably you were thinking about, is how am I going to finish my course, right, and keep the same thing. Now that I've also taught a course that was completely within the context of COVID, students have actually told me, right, okay, some of this might have worked better in the lecture room, and it doesn't work so well online, and they're probably right. So I have to rethink on the way I teach. But the baseline, if you're talking about what we think a student should know if they get a physics, math, mechanical engineering, computer science, you name it, diploma from TU Delft, of course, this is something that we should agree on, right? If you get this diploma, you can do these things. But almost all students can do more than these baseline things.
Yeah.
We don't want them to just do the base minimum. We want them to do extra stuff. Right? So, okay, so we set a baseline, right? We agree, okay, you can do it. And how you get to the baseline, that can also differ from one student to the other. But I'm especially interested in it. So how do you build on this, right? What extra things can students do? And we should talk about the baseline, right? We should not assume that the baseline from 20 years ago is the same as now. Right? So, for instance, presenting online is a skill that none of us had any training in, but might become very useful very soon.
Thank you.
Okay, Margreet?
Yes. Thanks. I agree with a lot of the approaches. I was just wondering, how do you help them best in finding their own path? You give your lecture, you give all the materials. How do you make sure that the students are getting there where you want them?
So, okay, so this depends on which situation we are already in, right? If we go and go with what Anushka asked about also differentiating in exams, then of course we can say give them examples of what we think is this level, is that level, and so on. But also right now, right, so what I've experimented with in my first year course this year is offering students different ways of interacting with problems. Right, so we have problems that are just essentially classical problems, right? They're in a PDF, they sit down, they write them, and they can talk to TAs or other students to solve them. But we also have an online environment where you get, where you put in your answer, you get immediate feedback on the answer, and then if it's right, you get a bonus point. If it's wrong, you get a hint on how to do it. And there too, you can also ask, can students work alone? Can they work in small groups? Right. So for some problems, I've said, okay, you can do this as a group. You can select your own group. For others, I want you to do them by yourself, so that you can see how far you got. Right? And so this way, by offering various options, right, you help students to find what works for them and what doesn't. Right? The pitfall is that students are going to try everything. Right, so you have to make it very clear to them that they're not expected to do everything. Right, you have to make it clear. Okay, right. This is one option. This is one option. Of course, you can sample the options, but then pick what works for you. And with that, you will get to the baseline, possibly plus something else.
Thanks.
Any more remarks, questions? Wow.
Yeah, I have one more. I like the idea of differentiating in testing, but I was thinking about how to implement it. For example, let's say you have an easier exam and a harder exam, and a student takes the harder exam but fails. Would this student be allowed to take then the easier exam, or how would you organize this?
Well, okay, so this is of course something to discuss. But one option, I mean, the best option would be an adaptive exam, of course, right? Where you say, okay, you try this hard problem, you did not make this hard problem, right? So we're now going to give you the easier problem and see if then you still pass. That would be the ideal thing. It is possible, right? For language tests, this is already used. It might be also especially for basic math, physics, engineering courses, it might actually work. The second option would indeed be say, okay, right, you can now select, right, hard, medium, easy, right, and then Dutch people always go for medium, right, so then you always need to have an easy so that they can skip something, right, but some will go for hard, and then if you fail the hard, okay, then you are allowed your retake, and you do the retake on medium, right, something like that. You had your chance, but then the retake is by default medium. And there's where you can go. Right, that would be an easier way with say, less technological demand.
So this sounds like an interesting discussion. Or maybe we can devote one of our education conversation on this topic with people who are interested to rethink our assessment and also see the role of the students in there. Might be interesting to follow up on that. I would love to. Yeah.
So would I.
Okay, great. And there's a question by Zoe in the chat, how do you see education on campus develop based on the blended way of teaching? What you believe will happen once we are back, short and long term? Well, back
Short term, I think everybody will just be very happy that we are back. No surprises there. And there, I think there's also a pitfall, right? We could just go back to what we did pre-2020, and I think that would be a pity, right? We should really use the things that, even though we were very busy and everything, we still learn things and use it. So one thing that I will surely do, right, even if in September I am allowed to go back to campus, I will keep the recordings that I made and offer them to the students. And then I will have to see, right, what works for which age group of students. Right, is it that they just watch the entire recording beforehand and we have a discussion about it? That may work better for the master students. For the bachelor students, it might be better that I still explain it in the classroom. We have the multiple choice questions, but then they can watch the video from last year rather than having to go on YouTube to find it themselves. Right? But there, I could also imagine, especially for these very large classes, that we offer students a choice. Right? So that you can come to campus and you can enroll in this course and doing it on campus, but we also have a full online alternative where we offer it to you in this online setting. So right, but that I think especially for the larger groups will be an option.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And then there's I think we have a few minutes left. What do you think will be the role of a lecturer, and what will be the role of the campus once we go back?
So the role of the lecturer, it has been said many times, right? It's to guide the students, right? It's essentially more and more like we do with students that do end projects with PhD students, right? Rather than being a one-way communication, it becomes a two-way communication. And if there's a topic that the student does not get, then you have a discussion, you explain it, you organize the material, right? You say, okay, this is a natural way of going through things. This is a selection of topics that fits well together. Here are resources, not just books anymore, but resources that will help you with it. And we have these sessions. The role of the campus, of course, hopefully will be what it was before, the place where we meet each other, right, and work together. And that is I for one, right, I'm introvert, but I very much miss going to the campus and meeting people in person.
Yeah. I think most of us agree here. Yeah. Okay. And you also, I was also interested in what you said about the collaborative textbooks, right? So you have your open book now, and you make it available, I guess, via, is it via the library or?
Yeah, so the open book is still a classical book now, right? In the sense that, okay, you can just get it at the library, you can get it for free, right? You're allowed to edit it if you want, but it's not offered as a tool, right? It's offered as a PDF. But then the next step would be, right, and this is part of the education fellowship project, that we actually allow people more directly to edit it, but then in such a way that people get credit for their contributions. And still there is a main or small group of main authors who keep an eye on quality. But ideally, right, my ideal would be something in between Wikipedia and GitLab, where people work together on code, but then with giving credit for contributions.
Okay. Yeah, we see this, of course, in math textbooks that are open source. That there are websites where people indeed make changes, and also who made which changes when, and they're discussed as well. But Foko asked something. Do you provide the text source? But I guess if you start working,
so right now not. Right, right now not. I mean, if Foko wants it, he can get it, right? But,
sure.
But the ideal would be that this at some point does become available, yes, so that people can adapt it to what they need, add chapters, but also have a version without certain chapters because they do not teach that material. Just offer it to the students.
Okay, well, I think in view of the time, and maybe some people actually have to teach in 15 minutes or so. I would like to thank the audience, everyone, for being here and contributed to a very active conversation. And thank you, Timon, very much for sharing your ideas also on how to diversify paths for our students in learning. And well, we hope we can continue this discussion other ways. And thank you all, and hope to see you soon in three-dimensional versions. Okay. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.